The royal meeting chamber had never felt so heavy with tension as Lord Reginald Montclair and Sir Percival entered, responding to King Edward's summons. Captain Marcus Thornfield positioned himself strategically near the door, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt, while other loyal guards took up positions around the room. The conspirators appeared confident, perhaps even slightly amused by what they assumed was another routine consultation. King Edward sat at the head of the mahogany table, the leather folder containing their crimes positioned prominently before him. His weathered face showed none of the emotional turmoil that had consumed him over recent weeks. Instead, he displayed the regal composure that had served him well through decades of leadership. "Gentlemen," the king began, his voice steady and controlled, "I have called you here today to discuss a matter of grave importance to our kingdom. It concerns theft, treason, and betrayal on a scale that threatens the very foundation of our realm." Lord Reginald's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of concern crossing his carefully composed features. Sir Percival, however, maintained his usual arrogant smirk, apparently convinced that whatever the king suspected could be easily explained away. King Edward opened the folder and began laying out photographs, documents, and financial records. "I know who you really are," he said quietly. "I know about Marie Du Bois, about your criminal background in Astoria, about the systematic theft of our treasury, and about your plans to deliver our kingdom to Blackmore." The transformation in the room was immediate and dramatic. Lord Reginald's face went ashen, while Sir Percival's arrogance evaporated, replaced by calculating desperation. Marcus tensed, ready for any sudden movement, as the two men realized their decades-long charade was finally over. "Your Majesty," Lord Reginald began, his carefully cultivated accent slipping back toward his working-class origins. "Surely there has been some mistake. These documents, whatever they are, must be forgeries designed to discredit our family's loyal service to the crown." King Edward's eyes blazed with controlled fury. 73 million crowns, Reginald. That's what you've stolen from my people. Children in our outer provinces go hungry because funds meant for their schools and hospitals ended up in your foreign bank accounts. Our military operates with outdated equipment because money allocated for their needs was diverted to your criminal associates. Sir Percival, perhaps realizing that denial was futile, chose a different approach. "Even if these accusations were true," he said with false bravado, "what could you possibly do about it? We have allies throughout your government, connections in every major kingdom, and resources that would allow us to destroy you if we chose." This threat was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. It constituted open admission of treason and provided legal justification for immediate action. At his subtle signal, the guards moved closer to the conspirators, while maintaining the pretense of normal security protocol. King Edward leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I am giving you one opportunity to salvage what remains of your honor. You will immediately transfer all stolen assets back to the royal treasury, provide complete information about your criminal network, and accept permanent exile from Valdoria. In exchange, your executions for treason will be commuted to life imprisonment in a foreign nation of your choosing." The offer was more generous than either man deserved, and they knew it. Marcus watched their faces carefully, looking for signs of how they would respond. Lord Reginald appeared to be considering the proposal, but Sir Percival's expression had hardened into determined resistance. "We reject your offer," Sir Percival declared, standing abruptly. "Furthermore, we demand that you destroy this fabricated evidence and apologize for these slanderous accusations. If you refuse, we will be forced to take measures to protect ourselves and our interests." Marcus moved instantly as Sir Percival reached inside his jacket, but instead of a weapon, the man withdrew a small communication device. Before he could activate it, Marcus had crossed the room and seized his wrist, preventing what would undoubtedly have been a signal to begin their planned attack on the kingdom. Lord Reginald, seeing his nephew captured, attempted to flee toward the chamber's secondary exit. However, he found his path blocked by Lieutenant Commander Harrison, one of Marcus's most trusted allies, who had been positioned there precisely for this contingency. "It seems you have chosen to resist," King Edward said sadly. "So be it." The coordinated operation that Marcus had planned began immediately. Throughout the capital city, loyal military units moved to secure locations that the Montclair conspirators had planned to use in their coup attempt. Bank accounts were frozen, communication networks were monitored, and known associates were placed under surveillance. The speed and precision of the operation caught the remaining conspirators completely off guard. Within hours, the entire network was in custody or cut off from their resources. The Blackmore operatives who had been preparing to exploit the planned chaos found themselves facing Valdorian troops instead of the weakened kingdom they had expected. But Marcus's greatest triumph came with the rescue of Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood. Intelligence gathered during the operation led them to an abandoned warehouse where she was being held by Montclair associates. She had been tortured for information about the investigation, but had revealed nothing, maintaining her loyalty to the crown even under extreme duress. The evidence that Sarah had managed to gather before her capture proved crucial in understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. Her financial analysis revealed bank accounts in 7 different countries, property holdings worth millions of crowns, and a money laundering operation that had been used by criminal organizations throughout the region. As news of the conspiracy's exposure spread, other kingdoms began sharing their own evidence of Montclair-related crimes. The family had been involved in arms trafficking that fueled conflicts between neighboring nations, human trafficking that had torn families apart across the continent, and financial fraud that had ruined countless honest businesses. The international cooperation that resulted from these revelations led to one of the most successful anti-crime operations in the region's history. Criminal networks that had operated with impunity for decades found themselves facing coordinated law enforcement efforts across multiple kingdoms. King Edward faced the difficult task of announcing the conspiracy to his people. The revelation that the royal family had been deceived for 40 years was indeed damaging to the monarchy's reputation. But the king's honest acknowledgement of his mistakes, combined with his decisive action to correct them, actually strengthened public support for his leadership. The recovered assets were used to fund massive infrastructure improvements throughout the kingdom. Schools were built, hospitals were expanded, and the military was modernized. The prosperity that resulted from these investments demonstrated to the people that their monarch was truly committed to their welfare, rather than to personal enrichment. Lord Reginald and Sir Percival, along with their criminal associates, were tried for treason, theft, and conspiracy against the crown. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and their convictions were swift. Rather than execution, they were sentenced to life imprisonment in the remote Coldstone Fortress, where they would spend their remaining years reflecting on the destruction they had caused. The broader criminal network was dismantled piece by piece, with assets seized and redistributed to their victims. The investigation continued for months, revealing the full extent of the damage that had been done and ensuring that every possible piece of stolen wealth was recovered. For Captain Marcus Thornfield, the successful resolution of the conspiracy marked the pinnacle of his career in service to the crown. King Edward elevated him to the position of Royal Security Advisor, with expanded authority to prevent future infiltration of the government by criminal elements. The kingdom implemented new oversight procedures for financial management, requiring multiple independent audits and transparent reporting of all royal expenditures. Background checks for positions of authority were strengthened, and a new intelligence service was established to monitor potential threats from both domestic and foreign sources. Most importantly, the kingdom's relationship with its people was fundamentally transformed. The transparency and accountability that resulted from the crisis created unprecedented trust between the crown and its subjects. Citizens who had previously felt disconnected from their government now saw evidence of genuine commitment to their welfare. Years later, as Marcus reflected on the events that had nearly destroyed the kingdom, he realized that the conspiracy's exposure had ultimately made Valdoria stronger. The painful revelation of the truth had forced necessary reforms and had demonstrated that even the most sophisticated deception could not ultimately triumph over justice and loyalty. The Kingdom of Valdoria emerged from its darkest hour as a model of good governance, international cooperation, and the triumph of truth over corruption. The legacy of the Montclair conspiracy became a cautionary tale told throughout the region, reminding future generations that eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. and that those who serve the public trust must be held to the highest standards of integrity. King Edward ruled for 7 more years after the conspiracy's exposure, his reign marked by unprecedented prosperity and international respect. When he finally passed the crown to his chosen successor, he did so knowing that he had left his kingdom stronger, more just, and better protected against the forces that would seek to exploit it for personal gain. The royal guard that Marcus had rebuilt became the gold standard for security services throughout the region, and their success in exposing and defeating the conspiracy was studied by military academies and law enforcement organizations across multiple kingdoms. The lesson they had learned, that the greatest threats often come from within, disguised as loyal service, became fundamental doctrine in protecting democratic institutions from corruption and subversion. 3 weeks had passed since Captain Marcus Thornfield received the shocking revelation from King Edward. During this time, Marcus had carefully assembled a small team of trusted individuals to help investigate the Montclair family's activities without raising suspicion. His chosen allies included Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood, a brilliant analyst with an eye for financial irregularities, and James Morrison, the royal librarian who had access to historical records and archives. The investigation had already yielded disturbing results. Sarah's analysis of the royal treasury records revealed that the embezzlement was far worse than initially suspected. The Montclair family had been stealing for so long and so systematically that they had essentially rewritten the kingdom's financial history. What appeared to be legitimate expenses were actually elaborate covers for theft. "Captain," Sarah reported during one of their secret meetings in the old watchtower, "I've traced at least 73 million crowns that have been diverted over the years. That's not including the property transfers and the trading contracts that were deliberately negotiated to benefit Montclair-controlled companies." James had made equally troubling discoveries in the archives. "I've found evidence that they've been altering historical records for decades," he explained, spreading ancient documents across the table. "These genealogical charts showing their noble lineage? They're forgeries, but they've been inserted into our official records so skillfully that most historians would accept them as authentic." But it was Marcus's own surveillance that revealed the most immediate threat. Following Lord Reginald Montclair and his associates had led him to discover a series of secret meetings with foreign operatives. Using his military contacts, Marcus had identified several of these individuals as agents of the neighboring kingdom of Blackmore, Valdoria's historical rival. The pieces of a much larger conspiracy began falling into place. The Montclair family wasn't simply stealing from Valdoria. They were systematically weakening it in preparation for a foreign takeover. The financial drain, the altered records, the influence over key government decisions, all of it served to make the kingdom vulnerable to outside control. Marcus's breakthrough came when he managed to intercept a coded message between Sir Percival Montclair and a known Blackmore spy. The message, once decoded, revealed plans for a coordinated attack on Valdoria's infrastructure, timed to coincide with a major royal ceremony where the kingdom's leadership would be gathered in one location. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity. The Montclair family had spent 4 decades positioning themselves to deliver Valdoria to Blackmore without a single battle. They would trigger a financial crisis, assassinate key royal family members during the ceremony, and then present themselves as the only stable leadership capable of maintaining order. In the chaos that followed, Blackmore forces would arrive as peacekeepers, ultimately installing a puppet government controlled by the Montclair conspirators. But as Marcus prepared to present this evidence to King Edward, he discovered that the conspirators had become aware of the investigation. Lieutenant Blackwood failed to appear for their scheduled meeting, and when Marcus went to her quarters, he found them ransacked and empty. A hastily scribbled note hidden under her mattress contained just 2 words: "They know." The disappearance of his trusted ally sent Marcus into high alert. If the Montclair family was willing to kidnap or eliminate a royal guard officer, they had crossed into open warfare against the crown. Marcus immediately increased security around King Edward, but he realized that conventional protection might not be enough against enemies who controlled so much of the kingdom's infrastructure. His fears proved justified when an attempt was made on the king's life just 2 days later. During the monarch's regular morning ride through the palace gardens, a section of an ancient stone bridge collapsed just moments after the royal horse passed over it. The collapse appeared accidental, old mortar finally, giving way after centuries. But Marcus's examination of the debris revealed evidence of deliberate sabotage. The near miss galvanized King Edward into action. "We cannot wait any longer," he told Marcus during an emergency meeting. "If we give them more time, they will succeed in either killing me or completely bankrupting the kingdom. We must act now, regardless of the political consequences." Marcus had anticipated this moment and had prepared accordingly. Over the previous weeks, he had secretly contacted loyal military commanders in the provinces, men who had served under him and whose loyalty to the crown was absolute. He had also reached out to trusted nobles who had never been part of the Montclair circle of influence. The plan they developed was necessarily complex. Simply arresting the conspirators would not be enough. They had too many allies and too much influence. Instead, Marcus proposed a coordinated operation that would simultaneously expose their crimes, seize their assets, and neutralize their ability to retaliate. The first phase involved securing evidence that could not be disputed or destroyed. Marcus and James worked around the clock to copy all financial records, correspondence, and documentation of the conspiracy. Multiple copies were created and stored in different locations, with instructions for their release if anything happened to the king or his loyal supporters. Meanwhile, Marcus's military allies began quietly positioning themselves to take control of key infrastructure points, the treasury, communication centers, and transportation hubs that the Montclair family might use to flee or fight back. This had to be done without alerting the conspirators, requiring careful coordination and absolute secrecy. The second phase would involve confronting the Montclair family directly, but not in the way they would expect. Rather than arrest them immediately, King Edward would invite them to a private meeting under the pretense of discussing a new trade agreement with a foreign nation. During this meeting, he would present them with the evidence of their crimes and offer them a choice: surrender quietly and accept exile, or face public trial and execution for treason. Marcus knew this approach was risky. The conspirators might choose to fight, potentially triggering the very chaos they had been planning to exploit. But King Edward was determined to give them one chance to leave peacefully, partly out of respect for his memories of Queen Isabella, and partly to minimize damage to the kingdom. As the confrontation approached, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through Sarah Blackwood's notes, which had been hidden in the library, he found evidence that the conspiracy was even larger than they had realized. The Montclair family had been working not just with Blackmore, but with a network of criminal organizations across multiple kingdoms. The financial theft from Valdoria was just one part of a massive money laundering operation that spanned international borders. The family had used their position in Valdoria to facilitate criminal enterprises throughout the region, taking a percentage of profits from everything from arms dealing to human trafficking. This revelation meant that exposing the conspiracy would have implications far beyond Valdoria's borders. Other kingdoms would demand justice for crimes committed against their citizens. International criminal organizations would likely try to eliminate anyone who threatened their operations. The political ramifications could destabilize the entire region. Yet Marcus also realized that this international scope provided an opportunity. If they could coordinate with law enforcement in other kingdoms, the Montclair conspiracy could be dismantled completely, rather than simply driven underground. The evidence they had gathered would be valuable to multiple governments seeking to combat organized crime. As the day of confrontation arrived, Marcus positioned his loyal forces throughout the palace and the capital city. Military commanders in the provinces received sealed orders to be opened only if they received a specific coded message. Copies of all evidence were placed with trusted allies in foreign capitals, ready to be released if the operation failed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the Montclair conspirators, but the future of the kingdom of Valdoria itself. Marcus had done everything possible to prepare for multiple scenarios, but he knew that once the truth was revealed, there would be no going back. The kingdom would either emerge stronger from this crisis, or it might not survive the chaos that followed. Standing guard outside the royal meeting chamber, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. He had spent his career protecting the crown from external threats, never imagining that the greatest danger would come from within the royal family itself. Now, as the final act of this decades-long deception began to unfold, he could only hope that justice would prevail without destroying the kingdom he had sworn to protect. Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the kingdom of Valdoria for 23 years, his loyalty to the crown unwavering through 3 different monarchs. Standing at attention in the marble corridors of Rosehaven Palace, he had witnessed countless secrets, political maneuvers, and royal scandals. But nothing had prepared him for what he discovered on that fog-laden morning in late autumn. The discovery began innocently enough. King Edward VII had requested a private meeting in his study, something that happened perhaps twice a year. Marcus entered the oak-paneled room, noting the unusual tension in the monarch's weathered features. The king, now in his 70s, looked older than his years, burdened by something heavier than the crown itself. "Marcus," the king began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to understand something about our kingdom's future. What I'm about to tell you must never leave this room, but someone must know the truth." The captain's training had taught him to remain impassive, but curiosity flickered in his dark eyes. King Edward moved to his personal safe, retrieving a leather-bound folder that appeared ancient, its edges worn from handling. Inside were documents, photographs, and correspondence dating back nearly 4 decades. "When I married Queen Isabella 38 years ago," the king continued, settling into his chair, "I believed I was securing our kingdom's future. She was beautiful, intelligent, and came from what appeared to be noble lineage. The Montclair family presented themselves as descendants of French aristocracy, with vast holdings and impeccable breeding." Marcus remained silent, though his mind began racing. Queen Isabella had passed away 5 years prior, but her influence on the kingdom remained strong through her family's continued presence at court. Her brother, Lord Reginald Montclair, served as the king's chief advisor, while her nephew, Sir Percival, held significant sway over the kingdom's financial matters. The king's hands trembled slightly as he opened the first document. "I hired a private investigator 3 months ago, Marcus. Not because I suspected anything initially, but because certain financial irregularities came to light. Money missing from the royal treasury, unauthorized expenditures, and strange property transfers that seemed to benefit the Montclair family exclusively." The first photograph showed a rundown apartment building in the industrial district of their neighboring country, Astoria. The second showed the same building's residents, people in working-class clothing, their faces bearing striking resemblances to the elegant Lord Reginald and his family. "The Montclair family," King Edward's voice cracked, "are not nobles. They are not even from noble stock. They are con artists, Marcus. Sophisticated, brilliant con artists who have been systematically draining our kingdom's resources for nearly 4 decades. Marcus felt his world shifting beneath him. The implications were staggering. "Your Majesty, are you certain of this information?" The king nodded gravely, pulling out more evidence. Bank statements showed regular transfers to offshore accounts controlled by Montclair family members. Property deeds revealed that several royal estates had been quietly transferred to shell companies owned by Isabella's relatives. Most damning of all were the forged genealogical documents that had established their false noble lineage. Isabella's real name was Marie du Bois. The king continued, his voice hollow with betrayal. She was the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress. Her brother Reginald is actually her cousin, a man who had served time in Asturian prisons for fraud and embezzlement. They created this elaborate fiction, complete with forged documents, paid actors to play distant relatives, and even established fake historical records. The captain's mind reeled with the implications. Every major decision in the kingdom over the past decades had been influenced by the Montclair family. Trade agreements, military expenditures, even the choice of which nobles received which honors, all had been subtly guided by their counsel. The investigator estimates they have stolen nearly 50 million crowns from our treasury over the years, King Edward said, his anger finally beginning to show. They've used their positions to embezzle funds, sell royal secrets to foreign governments, and even blackmail other nobles who discovered fragments of their deception. Marcus studied the evidence spread before him. Financial records showed how cleverly the theft had been executed, small amounts taken over long periods, always with plausible explanations. A charitable donation here, an emergency fund there, renovation costs that were triple the actual expenses, with the difference flowing into Montclair pockets. But the financial crimes were only part of the story. The king revealed how the family had systematically eliminated potential threats to their operation. Noble families who had grown suspicious had found themselves facing sudden financial difficulties, forcing them to sell their estates to Montclair-controlled entities. Servants who had overheard sensitive conversations had been dismissed on fabricated charges. One investigative journalist had died in what was ruled an accident, just days before publishing an exposé on royal financial irregularities. "They've turned our court into their personal criminal enterprise," the king said, exhaustion evident in every word. "And I've been blind to it for decades, trusting them completely because I loved Isabella and wanted to honor her memory." The emotional toll on the monarch was evident. Not only had his beloved wife deceived him fundamentally about her identity, but her family had been systematically destroying his kingdom from within. The man who had dedicated his life to serving Valdoria had been unknowingly enabling its destruction. Marcus began to understand why the king had chosen him specifically for this revelation. As head of the royal guard, Marcus had access to security protocols and investigative resources. More importantly, he was one of the few people in the palace who had never been influenced by Montclair money or favors. "What are your orders, Your Majesty?" Marcus asked, his military training overriding his emotional shock. The king closed his eyes, looking every day of his 74 years. "I don't know yet, Marcus. If I expose them publicly, it will destroy confidence in the monarchy. How can the people trust a king who was fooled for 40 years? But if I don't act, they will continue bleeding our kingdom dry until there's nothing left." The captain could see the impossible position his monarch faced. Revealing the truth would certainly damage the crown's reputation, possibly irreparably. But allowing the deception to continue would eventually bankrupt the kingdom and leave it vulnerable to foreign influence. "There's something else," the king added reluctantly. "The investigator believes they may be planning something significant. Large sums have been moved recently, and there's evidence of communication with foreign agents. I think they may be preparing either to flee the country with everything they've stolen or to attempt some kind of coup." This revelation chilled Marcus to the bone. The Montclair family controlled significant portions of the kingdom's financial infrastructure, had relationships with foreign governments, and knew every secret of the royal family. If they chose to act against the crown directly, they were positioned to do tremendous damage. As the meeting concluded, King Edward entrusted Marcus with copies of all the evidence, along with instructions to begin discreet investigation of current Montclair activities. The captain was to use his security clearance and trusted contacts to monitor their movements, communications, and financial transactions. Walking back to his quarters that evening, Marcus felt the weight of the kingdom's future on his shoulders. The very foundations of Valdoria's government had been compromised, and exposing the truth might cause as much damage as the original deception. Yet doing nothing would certainly lead to the kingdom's destruction. The loyal guardian had served his king faithfully for over 2 decades, but now he faced the most challenging mission of his career, protecting the crown from enemies who had been hiding in plain sight for 40 years, using the king's own love and trust as weapons against him. As Marcus locked the evidence away in his personal safe, he knew that the coming days would test not only his skills as a soldier and investigator, but his wisdom as a protector of the kingdom he had sworn to serve. The elaborate deception was about to unravel, but the consequences of that unraveling remained terrifyingly unclear.